There's a country that survived 1,000 years of Chinese occupation, French colonization, and one of the most devastating wars in modern history. And yet, the children who came out of that country, they became doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, and some of the most academically successful immigrant communities in the world. But here's the thing nobody talks about. It wasn't luck. It wasn't genetics. It was a parenting philosophy so deeply embedded in Vietnamese culture that most Vietnamese parents don't even realize they're doing it. I'm going to break down 7 core principles of Vietnamese parenting that produce some of the most resilient, driven, and emotionally grounded children in the world, and what every parent can learn from them. Section 1. The concept of Cần Cù, diligence as identity. The first principle is called Can Q, which roughly translates to diligence, hard work, and persistence. But in Vietnamese culture, it's not just a value, it's an identity. Vietnamese children aren't told you're so smart, they're told you work so hard. But here's why this matters. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying this exact difference. Children praised for intelligence develop a fixed mindset. They avoid challenges because failure threatens their identity. Children praised for effort develop a growth mindset. They embrace challenges because effort is something they can control. Vietnamese parents have been practicing growth mindset parenting for generations, not because they read a psychology paper, but because their history demanded it. When your country has been invaded, occupied, and rebuilt multiple times, you learn that talent alone doesn't save you. Persistence does. Therefore, Vietnamese children grow up believing that effort is the answer to every obstacle, not waiting for things to come naturally. Section 2. The village raises the child. Con bé. Culture. In Western culture, the nuclear family is the unit. Mom, dad, kids, maybe a dog. In Vietnamese culture, the unit is the entire family. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all actively involved in raising children. Ong ba, grandparents, aren't just visitors on holidays. They're co-parents. They live in the home or nearby. They teach, discipline, cook, and pass down wisdom daily. But here's what this does to a child's brain. Research from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child shows that children with multiple stable, caring adult relationships develop stronger stress response systems, better emotional regulation, and higher resilience. When a Vietnamese child struggles, they don't just have one parent to turn to. They have a network, a grandmother who survived war, a grandfather who rebuilt from nothing, an aunt who immigrated with nothing and built a business. Every adult in that network is a living lesson in resilience. But here's the deeper gift. Vietnamese grandparents don't just babysit, they transmit. They tell stories of hardship, sacrifice, and survival. Children grow up knowing where they came from. And that knowledge becomes armor. Section 3. Respect through language, the pronoun system. Here's something that will blow your mind if you've never studied Vietnamese. The Vietnamese language has no single word for I or you. Instead, every conversation requires you to identify your relationship to the person you're speaking to. You use different pronouns depending on whether you're speaking to a grandparent, a parent, an older sibling, a younger sibling, a teacher, or a stranger. To speak Vietnamese correctly, you must first understand your place in the relationship. Every single conversation is a practice in social awareness and respect. But here's what this builds in children. From the moment they learn to speak, Vietnamese children are trained to read social context, acknowledge hierarchy, and communicate with intentional respect. Not because they're forced to, but because the language itself demands it. This is why Vietnamese children often seem unusually socially aware. It's not personality. It's linguistic training that starts at age 2. Therefore, the Vietnamese language itself is a daily lesson in emotional intelligence. Section 4. Ein Hoc, education is survival. Ăn học literally means eat and study. The idea that education feeds you the same way food does. It is not optional, It is survival. This isn't just a cultural preference. It's a historical lesson written in blood. For generations, Vietnamese families watched everything be taken from them: land, businesses, homes, savings. But there was one thing no army, no government, no disaster could take. It's what you know, knowledge. But here's what this creates in children. Vietnamese children don't study because their parents nag them. They study because they've been taught, through stories, through family history, through daily conversation, that knowledge is the only truly portable wealth. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies found that Vietnamese immigrant children consistently outperform peers from other immigrant groups academically, not because of higher income or better schools, but because of higher parental emphasis on education as a core family value. But here's the nuance most people miss. Vietnamese parents don't just push grades, they push understanding. There's a difference between memorizing for a test and truly learning. Vietnamese culture values the scholar, the person who genuinely understands the world, not just the person with the highest score. Section 5. Emotional stoicism. Chiu Dong. Chiu Jung means to endure, to bear difficulty without complaint. And it is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Vietnamese parenting from a Western perspective. Vietnamese parents don't rush to remove every obstacle from their child's path. When a child struggles, the Vietnamese parents' first instinct is not to fix it. It's to let the child sit with the discomfort long enough to find their own way through. But here's the science behind why this works. Remember the research on brain development? When children experience manageable struggle, what researchers call tolerable stress, it strengthens the prefrontal cortex. It builds problem-solving capacity. It develops what psychologists call frustration tolerance. Vietnamese children learn early that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that growth is happening. But here's the important distinction. Chiu Jung is not neglect. Vietnamese parents are intensely present. They watch, they're available. They step in when it's truly necessary. But they don't confuse discomfort with danger. Therefore, Vietnamese children develop a relationship with difficulty that most children never learn. They expect it, they accept it, and they move through it. Section 6. Food as love, the kitchen as classroom. In Vietnamese culture, food is never just food. Every meal is a lesson in patience, precision, and care. Vietnamese cooking is complex. Hours of preparation, specific techniques, recipes passed down through generations. Children are brought into the kitchen early, not to watch, to participate, to chop, to stir, to taste, to learn. But here's what this actually teaches. Following a recipe teaches sequencing and planning. Chopping vegetables develops fine motor skills and focus. Cooking for the family teaches contribution and purpose. And the act of preparing food for others, not for yourself, teaches one of the most important lessons in Vietnamese culture. Your effort exists in service of the people you love. Vietnamese children grow up understanding that love is not just a feeling, it's an action. It's the hours spent in the kitchen. It's the bowl of soup left on the table before anyone else wakes up. Section 7. The weight of sacrifice and how it motivates. This last principle is the most powerful and the most delicate. Vietnamese parents don't hide their sacrifices from their children. They share them, not to guilt, not to manipulate, but to give their children context. A Vietnamese child who knows their grandmother walked miles to school with no shoes doesn't complain about homework. A child who knows their parents worked 3 jobs to pay for their education doesn't take it for granted. But here's the psychology. When children understand the cost of their opportunities, those opportunities become meaningful. Meaning is the most powerful motivator in human psychology. More powerful than reward, more powerful than punishment. Vietnamese parents give their children the gift of meaning by being honest about the journey. Not to burden them, but to connect them to something larger than themselves. Therefore, Vietnamese children don't just work hard for themselves. They work hard because they understand they are part of a story that started long before them and will continue long after. In closing, these 7 core principles aren't just parenting techniques. They're survival strategies refined over 1,000 years of history. And the most remarkable thing? They work not because Vietnamese culture is perfect, but because these principles are deeply, universally human. And every parent, in every culture, can borrow from this wisdom. If this resonated with you, share it with a parent who needs to hear it. Thanks for watching. This video reflects cultural observations and general research. It is not intended to stereotype or generalize all Vietnamese families. Parenting practices vary widely within any culture. This content is for educational and inspirational purposes only,